Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the Kreminna front line. As you can see, there are icons in this area. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of heavy clashes on this front line, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers and 7 armored vehicles. The Ukrainians, as far as I understand, still have possibility to cross the river in the vicinity of Granikovka, or maybe it is not a very easy job to defend Granikovka from the Russian side. So that means that Ukrainians are sending their commandos groups crossing the river, and maybe they have some positions on this bank of the river in this forest, and the Russians and in Masyutovka, as we know, the Russians haven't reported that they established control over this town, so we believe that there are some Ukrainian positions, some trenches, some fortifications, very small, but anyway, the Ukrainians are able to use them to cause some problems to Russians, and the Russians from their side attacking and shelling this area with artillery. There were no updates about any offensive operation in direction of Kupiansk, but we know that according to some Russian sources, the Russians managed to enter or get the outskirts of this town and the south part of this forest. Important thing that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost another tank in this area. Now let's move to Liman front line. As you can see, there are also a lot of icons in this area. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 150 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system, Grad. The Russians, recently they've started offensive operation to the south from Dibrova and Kreminna to the south in direction of Serebryanka, trying to force the Ukrainians to leave this bank of the forest and to leave this bank of the Seversky Donetsk river and to leave this forest. There are a lot of Ukrainians. We know that according to the deployment map, they have a lot of positions, and the Ukrainians were planning to use this forest as the main bridgehead to attack Kreminna, but now the plans have been changed, and now the Ukrainians think how to step back and to reduce their losses. But from the Russian side, they published a lot of video and photo confirmation of storming some Ukrainian positions. As you can see, they're trying to short the front line and to force the Ukraine to step back. And furthermore, as you can see, and we can split this forest in two parts. Let's say there is like the south part of this forest and the north one. And when talking about the north one, it's the area where the Ukrainians are able to give a fight and to fight. But when talking about the south one, this one, it's highly unlikely the Ukrainians are able to stand there. So if the Russians are able to push another few kilometers, the Ukrainians will be forced to step back and to go back to Serebryanka and Grigorievka. And as from that moment, after securing the flanks, after pushing the Ukrainians on that side of Seversky Donetsk river, the Russians will continue movements in direction of Yampol and Tarskoye. Now let's move to Donetsk. There are not much icons above Donetsk, but there are a lot of interesting updates coming from this town. First of all, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of clashes on Donetsk front line, including Bakhmut and other towns in this front line, the Ukrainians lost 490 soldiers and 17 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, also 3 fighting infantry vehicles, and another 9 light automobiles or something like this, and more other types of light automobiles and vehicles and so on. So as you can see, this is the heaviest losses from the Ukrainian side since the beginning of the special military operation. 490 soldiers. More and more soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers on the ground. We can say it's those one who we can talk about them like military influencers. They have some kind of maybe YouTube channels, Telegram channels, maybe TikTok channels where they're publishing their video about the situation on the front. And more such military influencers are saying that they received some kind of personal order to step back from Bakhmut. The Ukrainian military authorities took a decision first to save the most powerful, the most influence, and the most powerful brigades parts from Bakhmut in direction of Chasiv Yar. Of course, I believe that they have already took a decision about the rearguard forces. Something tells me that another few days the Ukrainians will try to hold this town, but as you can see, the losses among the manpower is very high, and this is the real consequences of a decision to step back from Bakhmut. You know that some parts of Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut are retreating according to the order, and some parts are retreating because they see that some parts from Bakhmut are retreating according to the order. Nobody wants to stand in Bakhmut. Nobody wants to be encircled. Nobody wants to become prisoners of war, and nobody wants to get in Russian hands. So I believe that maybe today, maybe tomorrow, we are going to see some kind of centralized retreating from this town, but at the very end we are going to see some panic and balagan, and there are going to be more losses from the Ukrainian side, a lot of prisoners of war, and this is the picture and this is the destiny of battle for Bakhmut. But anyway, let's see. There are no progress from the Russian side on the ground. As you can see, this town is encircled. Most of the bridges were destroyed, and there is just one way to evacuate from Bakhmut through these fields located between the western part of Bakhmut and Ivanovska, and then using the forest they're moving in direction of Chasiv Yar. So all these fields, all these areas under complete Russian fire control, artillery control, air strike control, sniper control, main pass control, and the numbers are saying for themselves as a result of clashes, I believe as a result of evacuation process. The Ukrainians lost up to 500 of soldiers, so this is the highest losses since the beginning of special operation. Now let's move to the south and let's talk about Donetsk. As you can see, Donetsk as usually is under very heavy fire. The Russians activated in the vicinity of Avdiivka. Recently the Ukrainians published a video of another attempt from the Russian side to storm Novobakhmutovka. They made some kind of a small attack fist, and there were like few tanks and few infantry fighting vehicles, but the Ukrainians spotted them, discovered and they attacked those forces with artillery, and as a result the Russians lost a number of tanks and armored vehicles, at least according to the Ukrainian sources. But anyway, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reported that during the previous 24 hours the Russians attacked. As you can see, the Western sources map has been updated. They're showing the directions of Russian attacks. So the Russians were attacking from Novobakhmutovka in direction of Novokalinovo. The Russians were attacking in direction of Krasnogorovka and Kamyanovka. The Russians were attacking in direction of Avdiivka from Spartak and Opytnaya. And the Russians also the Ukrainians repulsed another Russian attack in direction of Severnaya. So something tells me that after Bakhmut, some parts of Russian forces will be moved in direction of Seversk to short the front line, because now the front line is very huge and the Russians are forced to stretch the forces. Just imagine yourself. Let's talk just even about one Bakhmut, and let's assume that let's try to calculate the distance of the front line in Bakhmut. So as you can see, the currently distance of front line around Bakhmut is around 25 kilometers. But as soon as the Ukrainians take a decision to leave Bakhmut, and as soon as the Russians are able to take control over the Bakhmut, the front line will be shortened into, let's say, another just 5 kilometers. So 5 less, the front line will be 5 less in comparison with the current situation. This situation will allow the Russians to create more attack fist, and they will do everything as we discussed according to my previous video. They will try to establish the front line along the channel. And the same situation with Seversk. As you can see, according to the situation we have right now, the Russians need to control let's calculate the front line just by the river, Seversky Donetsk River. So the current front line is 51 kilometers. But if the Russians are able, let's say, to attack from Kremenaya in direction of Seversky Donetsk River, if the Russians are able to return Yampol and to establish front line along the Seversky, from the Seversky Donetsk River to to the, let's say, Sak and Vantseti, the front line will be just 17 kilometers. So as you can see, another 3 times less in comparison with the current situation. And this shortening, this optimization of the front line will allow the Russians to create another attack phase with, I believe, maybe 10 brigades or something, maybe less, 8 brigades they will be able to accumulate as a result of the shortening of the front line. And these brigades they will be able to use in some other place, let's say in Toretsk, New York agglomeration, or they will be able to redeploy them somewhere in the direction of Avdiivka, because these days the front line near Avdiivka has been activated by the Russians, and the Ukrainians are doing some active defense politics there, trying to make some short counter-offensive operations, but the Russians are providing more and more video and photo confirmation of airstrikes in this area, and so Avdiivka is under very heavy fire. Something tells me that maybe the Russians also will try to solve the issue with Avdiivka within the next stage of special military operation. Now let's move to the south, and there are no changes, just regular artillery duels. The Russians stopped any attempt to storm Ugledar. I believe that now they're trying to fix their positions, trying to establish bridgehead before maybe a possible upcoming greatest Ukrainian offensive operation in this area. During the previous 24 hours, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and 2 D-20 howitzers. As you can see, another day on this front line, and another tank that Ukrainian lost from their first tank brigade, and so on. So as you can see, from this perspective, the Russians are pretty successful. They're destroying every single day at least 1 or 2 tanks or something like this. When talking about South Donetsk area, there are no updates, just regular artillery duels. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of the clashes, the Ukrainians lost 2 helicopters, 2 Mi-8 helicopters in South Donetsk and Zaporozhye region. Now let's talk about Kherson. More and more interesting updates are coming from this town. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers, 20 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, 1 M777 howitzer and another D-30 howitzer. So as you can see, all these numbers are saying me that there is a very powerful spy network that was developed in Kherson during the presence of the Russians on this area. And now I see that this network works fine for the Russians, providing them very interesting, very important information. They correct and target the Russian artillery, and we see the result. Another day in a row when the Ukrainians are losing significant number of armored vehicles. Yesterday they lost just 6, today 20, the day before yesterday 30 armored vehicles, and on the 1st of March 16 armored vehicles. So significant numbers, and something tells me that the Russians took a decision to change their tactic in Kherson. And yesterday I told you that maybe the Russians would try to cross the river and to establish control over Kherson, but we understand on the negative sides of that operation. It will be the same situation without the bridge, without any kind of supplying and support of this town. So I believe that the Russians took a decision to change their tactic, and now they want to force the Ukrainians just to step back from the town. So they want to make Kherson as a gray zone. So completely free zone without any power, without the Russians and presence and without the Ukrainians' presence as well. So they want to create such a situation when the Ukrainians take a decision to leave this town as far as possible and not to risk with the manpower and so on. For now, the Ukrainians are not doing this because if they do this, they will lose and have some reputation losses. But I believe that if the Russians continue the same way, or the Ukrainians will lose all their army and manpower and the Russians will cross the river and take control over this town, or the Ukrainians will take a decision to step back as far as possible from Kherson, let's say to the line like of Pravdin, Soldatska, Blagodatna, so on, to the line of the previous front line when the Russians were on this bank of the river, just to secure their forces and not to get under fire control. Maybe they will have some forces inside of Kherson, a very low number, but if the Ukrainians take a decision to keep some forces, very low forces in Kherson, but just with one purpose, not to risk with the army under artillery fire, then the Russians will be able, by sending their commanders and scouts to destroy these forces. So this is also not an option. I don't know what exactly the Ukrainians are planning to do in this case, but from my perspective, if you ask me, to step back from Kherson is the best solution for the Ukrainians at this stage of the front line. Because one more time, just for the previous 5 days, the Ukrainians lost up to 100 armored vehicles. I'm not talking about fighting infantry armored vehicles or tanks. I'm also talking about light cars, just regular cars and so on. But this is also assets, military assets that Ukrainians can use for supplying, supporting, for rotation process and so on. And even a single car is very important, and sometimes just a small car is the best solution to, let's say, for evacuation process, for bringing some shells. And to lose just according to the artillery duels, up to 100 vehicles is a big disaster for the Ukrainians in Kherson. I must say that Kherson is a big disaster. It used to be a big disaster for the Russians when they were there, and now this is a very big disaster for the Ukrainians. And I see that they don't have any solutions how to solve this issue. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.